All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to the Newbie Photographer Podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Holritz, and it is a privilege to be here with you today. If you are streaming live with us, it happens to be Wednesday, so happy Wednesday to you. I hope your week has been good so far. We're going to get into a really important topic today, especially for new photographers, for which, of course, this podcast is dedicated. But actually, this is an important topic for all photographers. So if you happen to have had a business longer than 3 years, I normally say this podcast is for photographers 3 years in business or less. But this is really an applicable topic for everyone today. So if you're joining in, don't be shy. Join in the conversation. Ask questions. You can comment on the topic at hand, and we will introduce that topic here in just a second, along with our brand new guest. For those of you that are not live streaming, you're listening to the audio version of this after the fact, make sure to follow us at Noobie, N-O-O-B-I-E podcast on Instagram. You can keep up to date with the upcoming live streams and come be a part of the live streams. Take advantage of the opportunity for conversation, connection, and collaboration. I think that was three C's. I think I alliterated pretty well there. All right, enough of that. I want to introduce a brand new guest today. Freda Funnye is here with me. Freda, thank you so much for doing the show with me. I really, really appreciate this.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Well, and you and I had the opportunity to meet at the Cookout Conference. It feels like it's only been like a few weeks ago, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, something like that, here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And we had some really interesting conversation. And it just made sense to ask you if you'd be willing to come have a conversation with me on one of our podcasts here. And I appreciate you doing that. And I'm going to let you set up the topic here in just a second. But will you briefly introduce yourself to our audience?
Yes, my name is Freda Funnye, and I am a headshot and branding photographer here in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And I've been in the business a long time, but we're always learning and growing. So I'm excited to be here to share a little bit about what I've learned so far.
Well, and I appreciate that. And you're right. We are always learning, or at least should be, right? I think I've been in the industry long enough that I've seen photographers or professionals in our industry who start to get a little uptight and a little stuffy and inflexible, if you will, not open to change and shifting and learning and growing on an ongoing basis. And that will ultimately limit us as business owners, right?
Absolutely. So everything is always changing around us. And as business owners or as creatives, we should make sure that we're staying on top of it, but we're also open to new ideas and methods of doing things.
I love that. Well, and we're going to bring into consideration a topic today that probably plenty of photographers have heard in one form or another in the past, but maybe are not quite applying it to their business the way that they should. And we're going to get there in just a second. For anybody listening in, though, and I popped this up on screen already, but if you go to Freda, F-R-E-D-A, Funnye, F-U-N-N-Y-E.com, we'll link to this in the show notes at newbiepodcast.com. I got to get my podcast straight. And we'll link to Freda's site there. And then Instagram as well. And I meant to have this pulled up here, Freda. Let me pull up your Instagram account real quick here so everybody can see it. And it's the same thing on Instagram, of course, Instagram.com/Freda, F-R-E-D-A-F-U-N-N-Y-E, Freda Funnye on Instagram. And we'll link to both of those in the show notes at newbiepodcast.com. Let's jump into the topic at hand. We've been doing a series, Freda, on the show called I Wish I Knew. And I'm having photographers on the Newbie podcast who have been in the business for a while and can look back on their career and say, you know what, when I got started, I wish I knew a bit more about, and then fill in the blank, whatever that topic might be. I'm curious what that big idea might be for you.
So being that I've been photographing people for a very long time, since 2011, I thought it was always important just to have pretty pictures. But really it's about what is it that you do? How do you explain that to people? And I didn't have a concept of that 11 years ago. But now I totally understand that it's all about sharing just a one-liner of what it is that you do.
Well, and yeah, the word or phrase that came to mind as you were saying that is value proposition, right? We need to be able to communicate that value proposition, how we add value to that person's life through whatever service or product it is that we sell. In this case, it happens to be photography. And by the way, you do this really brilliantly on your site. I'm going to pull this back up for everybody who might be live streaming with us. Images that show off who you are and what you do. And what's really lovely about this, and I'm keeping the website pulled up here. If anybody is not live streaming, make sure you go to fredafunnye.com. Of course, we'll link to that in the show notes. But images that show off who you are and what you do, That is such simple, practical language, Freda, and yet that is the brilliance of it. That is the value in it, right? A lot of photographers try to be pretty and creative, not just with their pictures, but also with their words. And I think it's easy to get lost in what the photographer means by these words that they use. I love the practicality of the language that you're using.
Absolutely. I know that for many people, we see so much messaging. We see so much when it comes to TikTok and Facebook. And you really only have a few seconds to tell people what it is that you do. It's almost like an elevator pitch. And what's going to keep that person's attention, but also what is it that you can do for me? I don't care about the awards you have. I don't care how pretty, but what is it? What problem are you solving for me? And if you can tell people in a few sentences what it is that you can do to help them, you'll sell them every time.
I love it. And by the way, just the way that you explained that was so simple and easy to follow. This is exactly how we should be communicating to our clients as well. So props to you for that. I want to pop your website back up here just really quick because the subtext is really well written as well. So the primary value proposition being communicated is images that show off who you are and what you do. That is obviously what you as Freda Funnye, the photographer, provide. The subtext is we offer high quality branding and headshot photography for business and professionals, organizations, and individuals. And again, it's so easy to understand. It's clear, succinct. It doesn't take 5 minutes to read. It's not paragraphs of information. It's right there. It's above the fold without having to scroll down, and just super easy to understand. So you're practicing what you preach. But I'm curious, you mentioned being in business now or in photography for 11 years. Was there kind of a turning point during that 11-year period where the light bulbs came on and you're like, oh, you know what? I really should put more emphasis on the messaging, making sure I have clear messaging. I'm communicating my value proposition more clearly.
Absolutely. So I was noticing that, I wanted to photograph a certain thing, but I kept getting people that I did not want to photograph when it came to like people wanting newborn photography or people wanting things that I just didn't have the capacity to provide. So it wasn't until I signed up for a mentorship program through Tamaya Colvin where we got a little bit more in depth about messaging. And to that point, once I realized that you have to tell people what you do, one that saves you time but also stops them from guessing, is just tell people exactly what you do. And no one's going to come on my website and see that I do newborn photography or see that I do some type of boudoir photography. They know exactly what I'm providing, which is headshot and branding photographers for professionals and individuals.
So you start with that clear messaging, but you back that up with the work that you're showing. And I think that's really important as well. In fact, we talk about this, particularly on my other podcast, the Boca podcast, the importance of consistency between the messaging and the images we share. Because and one example that comes up, because I've seen it a good bit over time, is photographers, wedding photographers in particular, that will talk about being photojournalistic in nature and then have high fashion portraits on their site, just as one simple example. And it doesn't match. And some clients may be cognizant of what's going on there. Others, it may be kind of a subconscious awareness, but it creates a bit of confusion and a disconnect, and we're not managing expectations effectively at that point.
Absolutely. So if you look at some of your favorite brands, when you look at McDonald's or Nike, they're very consistent with their messaging. You wouldn't go to McDonald's for pizza, and their colors don't change. So we as small businesses should think in that same way. Whatever it is that you do, from if you're going on podcasts, if you're going on a news station, if you're doing social media marketing, or you as yourself are going out into the public, your message should be consistent through all types of platforms. And one of the biggest things I think that our watchers can take away is that your message should be so clear that other people can tell others what you do when you're not in the room.
I like that. Yeah, because even when you speak directly to a photographer, a lot of times you get 5 minutes of just a lot of different stuff. And it's hard to maybe even make some sense of what it is they're saying, much less somebody else talking about your brand. If you as the photographer and business owner can't clearly communicate in 3 to 5 seconds what your business represents, how is anybody else going to be able to talk about you effectively? So that's a really great point. I love that you frame it that way, and I don't think we've actually talked about it that way in any of the podcast episodes previously. So I love that. It's a really important piece of advice. Let's get to practical application, how you've applied this to your business, and ultimately how you'd recommend that photographers do the same with theirs. Before we do that, if there's any way you can turn volume up on your side, Freda, because I want to make sure that everybody can hear you really loud and clear, and then we'll jump into that information. If there's any, do you have volume sliders on that end maybe? Okay, perfect.
Absolutely. And maybe because I need to talk a little louder.
Oh, you could do that as well. Yeah, we just want to make sure to hear you clearly as we go on. It's my fault. I talk too loud. We don't want there to be an imbalance.
It's okay.
All right. Well, let's jump into then that practical application. And you mentioned to me before we got started, you've got kind of 3 big ideas to share here, ways that you've applied this concept of clear and strong messaging for the sake of brand development to your business. And of course, we will make this relevant to the photographers listening and watching, particularly new photographers as well, because in order to build a business effectively, it's so important that we're able to communicate, as you were talking about, clearly, succinctly, simply what our business represents. So how does this look in your business? How have you applied it to your business?
Well, I do want to start off by saying that, as you grow, your messaging will change, but it won't be off track. It will only grow. But I think the first thing is to recognize what your why is and what is it that you are solving. What problem are you solving? And just speak to that problem. That's the first thing. Understanding what your why is and who are you serving and what problem are you solving. So if you want to go ahead and jump into the second one.
Yeah, feel free. I'm sorry. I was very quickly taking notes as you're talking. So yeah, continue and we'll come back to each of these points.
Okay. And I would say number 2 is, make your messaging ingrained, like repeat it constantly to yourself every day until you can say it clearly. When anyone walks up to you, you know exactly what it is that you do. For me, I'm a headshot and branding photographer in Myrtle Beach, and I provide headshots and branding images to professionals and personal brands. So just repeating that and keeping it the same everywhere you go, so no matter who walks up to you, you're ready to go. We like to call that a one-liner sometimes. And just 3, just making sure that your messaging is clear across all platforms. We know that social media is growing and it's going to keep growing, but for me, if you can tell my name is the same across everything, from my website to my social media to anything, it's always the same. I try to keep my pictures all the same. So that's a big thing when people are looking to find you across different platforms as well, that everything visually looks the same as well.
This is good.
That's pretty much it.
Well, and you say it's pretty much it. It seems simple, but this is such practical, actionable advice that I think is important for everybody to keep in mind. So let's go back to that first point. What problem are you solving? If a photographer is trying to figure out how to effectively communicate a brand position, which is really what this is ultimately, all they have to do is answer that question. And I would add maybe the caveat, which is to answer that question exactly like you did, Freda, which is to use practical everyday language that would be relevant to or easily understood by the target client, right?
Absolutely. Keeping it simple. We know what we know, but not everyone else knows what we know. So the simpler, say it like a 5th grader can understand it. Just keep it simple. What is it that you do?
I love that you say 5th grader.
Stick with.
Well, and I say that because a lot of times in communicating with my team about our marketing message, but then ultimately the way that we communicate how to interact with our companies at all, I talk about that. I mean, sometimes it's a 1st grader, sometimes it's a 5th grader, a 3rd grader, whatever it is. But ultimately, it should be anybody from a 10-year-old to an 80-year-old should be able to understand this clearly and easily and succinctly. And we shouldn't be using words that are certainly photography industry specific. We shouldn't be using words that are vague in nature, right? If we're using words that can mean 5 different things to 5 different people, better pull back from that and go with something that's a lot simpler and a lot more practical. So I love that recommendation. And then 2, familiarize yourself with your messaging so it's easy to share. That's how I kind of framed it or wrote it down. But this is also important too, and it seems kind of obvious, but I think to our earlier conversation, a lot of times it's easy when somebody says, hey, what do you do? Or what's your photography business about? To just feel kind of blindsided and then just start rambling, right?
Absolutely. You should already know what it is that you do. But if you I mean, whatever you got to do, if you got to put it in your car, put it in your bathroom, but make that your personal pitch. Make it your tagline. So whenever you're out and about, you're not caught off guard, because soon as people feel like you don't know what you're talking about, you've already lost them. But if you can speak confidently in what it is that you're offering, people want to know more about what it is that you do. They won't shy away from you.
And I would suggest, this may sound a little nerdy, Freda. I don't know if you've ever done something like this, but when I either I'm getting ready for a presentation, or maybe getting ready to do a podcast, and I know it may be a little bit of a challenging interview, or I'm getting ready to have a tough conversation with somebody personally or professionally, especially in the car for some reason, but I'll do it here in my house as well. I will actually rehearse what I'm going to say out loud. Sometimes I'll tell my kids, I'm like, hey, I'm getting ready to prep for a presentation, so you're going to hear me talking out loud. That's what I'm doing. But taking the time to actually talk through what it is that you're getting ready to say, whether it's as simple as a position statement like we're talking about here, or anything else, rehearsing that out loud, tone of voice, the intention behind it, picturing somebody in front of you, whatever you have to do, taking the time to do that can really help you be a more effective communicator. Have you ever done anything like that?
I grew up in the church, a Baptist church, and everyone knows Easter comes around. And my grandmother would make me rehearse my speech over and over and over as if I was already in the church. So that way, when I got up in front of people, it wasn't no skipping over words. It wasn't using a paper. I was confident in what I was trying to say with my Easter speech. So I was able to translate that over into my life now. So if you have to talk in the mirror, talk to your kids, talk to your dog, whoever, just go ahead and get yourself into that routine. So when people approach you, you're confident wherever you go. You're ready to go at the drop of a dime.
Okay, that's good. We're almost done here, but before we keep going, do me a favor, turn your volume down just a little bit, because I'm echoing, I think, in the speaker. I think instead of turning you up early, we turned me up, and now they're hearing double of me, and nobody needs to hear double of me. That's good.
I hope that's better.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So we'll finish up here. And this has been such great, simple, practical information. So I really appreciate you having this conversation with me. The third point that you made, which also is a really important one that needs to be reiterated, is consistency in the messaging across platforms. So I actually want to jump back to your website here. I'm going to pull this up. So if anybody is not live streaming, you're listening to audio of this, go to Freda, FredaFunnye.com, FredaFunnye.com. And you can see the messaging that we talked about earlier, the brand position message, or a statement rather, and the subtext underneath it, that again, it's just so well written. Images that show off who you are and what you do. We offer high quality branding and headshot photography for business professionals, organizations, and individuals. Now, what I'm going to do here is try to open up a separate tab and go to Freda's Instagram account. Here we go. And what we see here is headshot and branding photographer in Myrtle Beach. I provide quality images and video that help you look good in your business. So to Freda's point, the message is mirrored there. And again, this is important. By the way, I will also note, Freda, that you actually have your name in your Instagram profile, which for some reason is not something that photographers tend to do. I have no idea why. So just kudos to you. That's a side note. But the messaging is consistent in that you're communicating clearly what it is that you offer as a service there. And I would assume the same thing on Facebook or any other profiles that you're creating.
Absolutely. Across every platform, I don't care where. If they go to Pinterest, which I'm not on there yet, but I want everything to be consistent. So when they go to whatever, wherever they go, even if it's on business cards or whatever, they know exactly what they're going to receive from me.
Yeah, consistency is important, especially when we want to build a brand. If you are going to offer wedding photography, but then you show family portrait photography in a different place, or you want to offer commercial or headshot photography, but then you show wedding photography in a different feed, it creates, again, that sense of confusion that we were talking about. Consistency is super important. And Ahmad is commenting actually Ahmad, is commenting from YouTube, and he says, she is dope. Thanks for chiming in, for listening in. And for all of those who've live streamed today with us, really appreciate it. I know this is a very brief conversation, but honestly, Freda, I think this kind of simple, practical advice is super important, especially for new photographers. And so I appreciate you be willing to have the conversation with me on the show today. Will you just remind our listeners one more time where they can find you online, follow you on social media as well?
Absolutely. You can find me on Instagram at fredafunnye.com and also Facebook at Freda Funnye.
And I've got those up on screen. And again, we'll link to these in the show notes at newbiepodcast.com. That's the other podcast, newbiepodcast.com. We'll put that in the show notes there. I appreciate everybody who's live streamed with us today. And then again, for those of you that are listening to the audio of this after the fact, don't be shy. Come back, join us for a live stream in the future. Follow us at Newbie Podcast on Instagram. Thanks again, Freda.
Thank you.